Thus far, we've looked at using forms, labels, text boxes, and buttons to create our interface. And each object we put in our GUI interface is an instance of a class for that type of object. So when we create a button, it is an instance of the button class. And the button class, as we mentioned earlier, the classes dictate the properties, methods, and events available to that object. Same with the label. It has properties, methods, and events that are shared amongst all labels. You've noticed, though, as we've gone through the different controls so far, that a lot of them have the same properties throughout. They all have a back color and a forward color. They all have a name. They all have text. And there's a reason for that, and that's called inheritance. So those classes for label, text box, and button are all inherited from a parent class called the control class. Let me see if I can demonstrate that with an analogy. Let's think about geometric shapes. Let's suppose we created a class for geometric shapes, and it had a property of area and perimeter. But then we could create two more classes, one for rectangle and one for ellipse. But a rectangle and an ellipse are both types of geometric shapes. And so we can inherit from that geometric shape the properties, methods, and events into those two new classes for rectangle and ellipse, and we don't have to recreate those items. So the rectangle has area and perimeter because it is a geometric shape, but it also then has some unique properties, which is width, length, and maybe whether it's square or not. That could be a Boolean value. The same with the ellipse. It's also a geometric shape and inherits the area and perimeter, although we might refer to the perimeter more as circumference for an ellipse. But it has a property of radius that a rectangle certainly doesn't have, and not all geometric shapes have. And it might be a Boolean property here of, is it a perfect circle or not? We all know about inheritance. As humans, we inherit physical and personality traits from our parents, but we may have some properties or some methods that our parents didn't have. Maybe you have a great skill at art or music, but neither of your parents had those skills. So we can have unique things for each of these different classes in addition to what is shared from the inherited class, what we call the parent class or base class. So the rectangle and ellipse in this case are considered child classes or classes that are derived from the base class or the parent class. So that's part of this object-oriented programming pillar of inheritance that we'll look at much further down the road. But I wanted to explain why you see a lot of this common properties, even though some of them may not be used by the different subclasses or child classes. In our system Windows.Forms, we have a control class that contains a whole bunch of properties, methods, and events, and then the various controls that we're using are derived from that control class. So the label class contains all the properties that are part of the control class. And we see the back color and the forward color and the font and the size and so forth. And the same with the text box and same with the button class. But the label class adds some unique properties such as the border style, the text align property, and then in a few lessons we'll look at the image list and image index. We didn't look at those when we looked at labels, but those are properties of the label that come in handy for displaying some images in the label. In the text box, we had a property for multi-line that didn't exist in the label class and doesn't exist in the button class because it's not part of the control class. We also saw a password char property, placeholder text, and text align there as well. For the button class, there's an auto size mode property. Not only does the parent class share the properties, it also shares the methods and events. So in the parent class, we have some methods for hide and show, and we can hide and show labels, text boxes, and buttons because they contain those methods. They've inherited those methods. Same with event. They all have a click event because the control class has a click event, or a mouse enter, or mouse leave, or mouse hover, and a whole bunch of others. This is just a small sample of the properties, methods, and events that are available not in the control class, but in all of our child classes. Button, for example, has a double click event that's unique to the button that is not shared by the text class or the label class because it's not part of the control class. If we return to the system.windows.forms namespace documentation in Microsoft Learn, we can scroll down on the left-hand side and see that there is a control class here. We can look at that. We can click on the control class and we can scroll down through to the properties and see all the properties that are listed here for the control class. And these will look familiar because you've seen these already. Maybe we didn't use them, but you've seen them in the label, the text box, and the button class instances that we created. You can also see here all the properties associated with that control, as well as, a little further down, there's the methods. And the events. I'm going to collapse these. We'll scroll down a little bit further to the label. So here's our label control. And we can see basically here that it inherits from the systems.windows.forms.control. So that's its parent class. But we can also see here, we can scroll down to the list, but if I'm going to click on the properties here, here are the properties that are designed into the label class, in addition to those that it inherited from the control class. Same way, here are the methods that are defined in the label class and the events that are defined for the label class. If we come down to the text box, we can see the same thing. So the text box also has properties that are unique to it, methods, and events. So it only has one event outside of those that it inherited from the control class, and that is the text align changed. Let's take a look at the button. Now I said that the button inherited from the control class, and it really didn't. It inherits from the button base class. But the same property, the same idea applies here in that the button base has properties, methods, and events that it inherits. But once again here for the button, we can see the properties, the methods, and the events. And again, on any one of these, we can click and see more about that particular method or that particular event or that property. So once again, use the Microsoft Learn documentation to your advantage in learning about the different controls and in coding in Visual Basic. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.